You're listening to Raising Relationships, a podcast by the South Carolina Infant Mental Health Association. Here are your hosts, Amaris and Tiffany.
Hey y'all, welcome in. What comes to mind when you hear the word expulsion?
You know, Amaris, the first time I heard the word expulsion, I immediately thought of high school. And I assumed that it was for the most challenging of cases. And when I started working in early learning environments, I was floored when I found out it was happening to most children from birth to 5. The word expulsion to me now holds a totally different tone. Does it for you?
Absolutely. I don't think I knew that children under the age of 5 could be expelled. That was a new concept for me. And to hear that it was happening, and to hear that it was happening at the rate in which it was happening. And lastly, Tiffany, having my own personal experience with soft expulsion really just brings up so many emotions in my belly. Even I feel that I've had that experience. I know what it means as a parent to have that big, massive word placed on a little bitty child.
And I can think of it as somebody who was going in as a technical assistant and seeing so many children expelled one after another. And so now the word expulsion holds a totally different meaning for me. It represents obstacles and hardship and exhaustion of the child and the family and the parents and the primary caregivers, a lack of support, and the worst part, implicit bias.
Tiffany, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking as you were naming words that expulsion has now brought up for you, I'm thinking about barriers. I'm thinking about systemic oppression, right? I'm thinking about all these barriers that families have to come up against in order to, again, just see their child be successful, and the harm that that can sometimes bring to parents. And let's not forget about those caregivers, those teachers who are in the classrooms who I'm sure don't want to make those hard decisions, those directors who don't want to make those hard decisions and are feel like they're helpless and this is their only resort. So many emotions.
Remember Shontee? She's Micah's mom and is a central voice in raising relationships. Well, she's also no stranger to expulsion and the roller coaster of emotions that come with it.
This is what I'm dealing with. And I would tell her about the crying. I would tell her about the hitting. I would tell her about how he's just really stubborn and, you know, he would just, for any little reason, get upset. So she would be like, oh, she told me, I can handle it. We can handle it. Don't worry about it. It's all about structure. I get him in that daycare. And it couldn't have been more than, I want to say a week or two. I started getting phone calls. You need to come and get him. You need to come and get him. You need to come and get him.
You need to come and get him. You need to come and get him. In listening to Shontee, you can hear the frustration and the fear because she has a full-time job and 2 other kids.
Is there a difference between expulsion and you need to come and get him? You need to come and get him? What is the official South Carolina definition of expulsion? It's an exclusionary practice in which a child is permanently dismissed from the program in response to adult perception, and that's important, of challenging behavior. This includes instances when a school or program dismisses a child or the parent and family is encouraged to pick them up consistently or disenroll from the school program.
But there are a few other dynamics at play here too. Shontee got really specific with us about a situation with Micah that resulted in his expulsion from daycare.
Micah got expelled because he was in the bathroom and he was playing, with the paper towels. A teacher that didn't know his situation walked in the bathroom, caught him, and she proceeded to say, "You're in trouble, you need to come with me." When she did that, at that time, you didn't know what his triggers were. You didn't know what might set him off. So he kept telling her that he was scared, he was scared, he was scared, he was scared. So instead of her getting his teacher and getting the teacher involved, she called the principal and the administrator. 3 women in the bathroom, now at this time with a 5-year-old, that's saying that he's scared to get in trouble. He hid underneath of the toilet in the bathroom and they couldn't get him out. When somebody thought, let me go get his teacher, because she knew about it, about Micah, she comes in there and she talks to him. But by that time, you have 4 women in the bathroom with him while he's hiding. And he's felt like he was in a corner. So what did he do? He broke out. And when he did, he touched the teacher and they expelled him.
There is a lot to unpack here. And as we've alluded to, Shontee is our storyteller here on Raising Relationships. But she and Micah are certainly not alone in experiencing this.
We want to honor and acknowledge the work of Walter Gilliam's research on expulsion. From that research, what we know is that approximately 250 children a day are either suspended or expelled from early care and education settings. The rate of expulsions occurring between the ages of birth and 5 in childcare are 13 times higher than expulsions in kindergarten through high school combined. Something we also want to note is that there are stark racial and gender disparities that persist in expulsion rates. Black children represent 18% of preschool enrollment, but 48% of children who receive out-of-school suspension. And boys represent 54% of preschool enrollment, but 79% of preschool boys are suspended multiple times.
So that means, Amaris, that half of the children expelled every day are Black boys. Mm-hmm. And I've heard also about the preschool to prison pipeline. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So here's what we know. Young children who are expelled or suspended are as much as 10 times more likely to drop out of high school, to fail a grade, or be incarcerated.
Wow.
That is that preschool to prison pipeline.
So let's go back to our friend Kerrie Schnake. We heard from her in the last episode. She's the CEO of SCIMHA. We talked to Kerrie about the impact of expulsion on kids and families, and this thing called the preschool to prison pipeline.
Kerrie, I'm gonna allow Tiffany to kind of ask more questions about this, but I remember you were talking about when you came to South Carolina and you brought SCIMHA with you to South Carolina. You mentioned there was this third piece that kind of helped you in the foundation, which was the focus on expulsion and what expulsion looks like in our early childcare settings. Tiffany, do you want to ask a little bit more about expulsions and what that looks like? Because I can be honest, before I started doing this work, I didn't know that toddlers could be expelled from early childcare settings. So that was new to me. So Tiffany, what are your thoughts or what are your questions about expulsion and what that looks like?
I just want to piggyback on that and say when I first heard about the expulsion statistics from birth to 5, I was absolutely astounded. I couldn't believe that they are as high as they are. But also the piece that expulsion can look different. It's not just you gotta go. It can be really a little more under the radar sometimes. And so that's kind of the piece that I'd really like to dig into, Kerrie, is when we talk about expulsion, what are the statistics? What are they telling us, first of all?
Well, alarmingly, and as you've said, and I was also shocked to learn that preschool children are expelled nationally at a rate that triples that of children in K through 12.
Wow.
There's also disparities in who is expelled. There's racial and gender gap disparities that are showing up in expulsion rates. Black boys are expelled at a rate far above other populations. So Black children represent 18% of preschool enrollment, but 48% of preschool children are receiving suspension or expulsion experiences.
Wow. So half of the children being expelled in this country are Black boys.
Yes. Although that population, Black boys represent only 18% of the population. It's an alarming practice. Obviously, it's got multiple rippling effects. So it's bad for the children. Each transition is disrupting their relationships. And it requires the child to readapt and relearn a new environment. And it's shaping their perception of adults. Are adults people who I can rely on and depend on? Is my life a stable environment? Or is there a lot of chaos and disruptions, and people don't seem to meet my needs? My needs are not met. The adults in my world don't know how to give me what I'm needing when I tell them in the way that I know how to tell them based on my months or years in the world. And that's going to impact who they are later in life. Young children who are expelled or suspended they're 10 times more likely to drop out of high school or to fail a grade, to be incarcerated. We talk about the preschool to prison pipeline. It's really shameful, and it's shameful. And I don't mean that completely on the shoulders of early care and education teachers. I mean, it's shameful for us as a country. Teachers are, no, I don't think any early care and education provider, teacher, director expels children out of, any malintent. I think it is this struggle of keeping the doors open. Keeping the doors open means having paying parents. If there's one child's behavior that is really big and creates stress for the teacher, and the other parents start complaining, then the director has to make this economic decision. Do I keep my doors open by making sure most of the parents stay here and pay? Or do I commit to this child and this family? I don't really know what to do for them. But, like in my values say I don't kick children out. So I'm going to stick with it, even though I don't know what to do. And then in that process, I'm going to lose a lot of other families, and I'm not going to be able to pay my teachers who are already making a pittance. And, it's a problem that deserves a lot more attention than it's getting right now. And it's a complicated problem. So part of it is structural things, not being able to have ratios in the classroom that are small enough where teachers can devote the kind of attention that every single individual child deserves and needs to have their needs met. Some children require a little more attention or a little more time to understand how they express their needs. And that's easier to do if there's small groups, small teacher ratios. And then some of it is, we keep hearing teachers, parents, any human that interacts with children saying lately that the challenges feel bigger. The behaviors feel bigger, and children of all ages. And that, we're pointing a lot of that to the ripple effect of COVID and the isolation that went with it, and the strain that the adults in the world felt, and how that was relayed to their children. So the problems are bigger. And there are children who have experienced trauma, and they need professionals with an understanding of mental health and trauma to know how to respond. And so, that's where we have our infant mental health consultation network can help teachers navigate those waters, because you can't know everything. You can't, I'm afraid our teachers, childcare teachers, school age teachers are asked to be, pediatricians get put in this position too. They're asked to be everything for the child. We want you to know everything. We want you to have every resource and be able to do all the things, because this is where the kids are. And,
right. And that's very hard.
It's hard. Yeah. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's where we can offer some kind of other resources to offer supports within these settings.
We should probably also take the time. It just occurred to me. Maybe we can also just take a step back and talk about what expulsion means. What do we mean specifically when we're talking about expulsion in early learning settings?
Yeah, well, there's formal expulsion, which probably happens a lot less than the informal. Formal expulsion is, if the childcare director says, we are expelling your child for this behavior, or we are suspending your child cannot come for the next week because of this particular incident, and they must be out for this period of time. That's, most early care and education folks understand enough about child development to know, it doesn't happen in that kind of one precise way. It's not like the child broke some rule and there's a consequence. It's more like, we don't know what to do for this child. We don't know how to help this child. It's stressing out the teacher. It's disrupting the class. It's, it's stressing out the other kids. And so soft expulsion is essentially creating circumstances where the parents who have brought their child to childcare because they need to work can't work. They're being asked to come pick up their child on a regular basis. They're saying, why don't we give it a break? Let's let everybody have a break. How about if you keep the child home for a couple days? Let's try half days for the next several weeks. And then ultimately it's, well, the program just isn't really a good fit for your child. We can't meet your child's needs. And again, I don't think it comes from a malicious point. I have talked to many directors and teachers who say, this child just really needs a special program that has smaller ratios and, teachers who have more skill and what it means to support kids with big behaviors. And I don't disagree. They do, but there's not a magical place. Unfortunately, there's not a magical place. Your center, whomever I'm talking to, director, teacher, your center can be that magical place. Let's work together and kind of build up those supports. Because it's just, they're not doing it because it comes from a bad place. It's simply a lack of resources and time and knowledge.
Exactly. And so I think with expulsion, it's an important part that we need to really highlight here is the fact that a huge piece of an intervention, or what we want to see, is more teacher support. We want to see more teacher support for those teachers who really are in predicaments where they have children with lots of needs and they have lots of children that they are supposed to be focusing their attention on simultaneously. Amaris, were you going to say something?
No, I love, Kerrie, you really defining for us the difference in this kind of formalized expulsion and then these more soft expulsions, because we know those happen. I can even say personally as a mom, right, of a little boy, the comments similar to what you stated that I've heard about, we just can't meet his needs here, and the helplessness that you feel as a parent, knowing that your child, needs to be in those settings and could really thrive in those settings, but they're having these big behaviors, they're having these big emotions that no one really knows how to manage or to deal with, and it becomes this helplessness that a parent feels, and I'm sure as well a helplessness on the behalf of those teachers and those directors wanting to really, again, serve and support that child and really not knowing how to. And so it becomes very complicated, I think, on both ends. And so I know you are familiar and intimate with Shontee's story about Micah and how, he experienced some soft expulsions and all the disruptions he had in those different settings. And so I wonder if you were to speak, you've done so much work on behalf of teachers and educators. I wonder if you could speak to the parents now who are experiencing these soft expulsions and who are experiencing these big behaviors, maybe even in the household as well, but don't know what to do. What advice would you give to someone like Shontee who's experiencing those soft expulsions?
Yeah. I loved listening to her story. And I loved what an advocate she was for her child and a champion. And it also broke my heart that she was kind of led to question her own ability and her own perceptions of her child, because she kept getting, she's like, these are the professionals. These are early care and education professionals, and they're saying these things. So maybe there is something there. Maybe I don't know. And that's a hard place to be. Parents, we're always questioning ourselves and are we doing the right thing? But so I guess I take from her story, and I think it's good advice for all parents, is to be your child's champion. To have conversations with other adults who are caring for your child regularly, openly, honestly. I heard Walter Gilliam, who did a lot of the pre-K expulsion research early on and is continuing to say, anecdotally, he had never heard of a expulsion happen where the child's parent and the child's teacher had a relationship. And that when those adults have a relationship, there's lots of communication going on. There's a lot more patience and understanding from both parties. The parent understands the complexity of the teacher's job. The teacher understands the stress that the parent is feeling, and they're kinder to each other. They're willing to look at things a different way. So I think, trying to build that from day one, not when there's a problem, but on both ends, the teacher and the parent. It's so important that from day one, they're really working on building their own relationship around the child. But having those conversations, what are the routines? What makes your child worried? How does your child express their needs? And it's going to be different. And some kids have had early experiences that have told them the best way for me to get attention is to, use my fist or bite and so it's not to punish the child. They have learned from their environments. That's what our brains are set up to do. We are born and our brains say, what is important to survive in this world? I'm going to reinforce those pathways, and the things that aren't important and aren't helping me get my needs met, I'm just going to prune those off of my brain. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. So it feels really wrong to punish a child for adapting to their world. That's what their brain was programmed. That's what humans are meant to do. So thinking of it in that light and trying to understand why the child is expressing their need and the way they're expressing their need, what isn't being met, and helping together the parent and the teacher kind of talking about how to reshape that with consistency in both environments. Children need that consistency for those brain pathways to be reinforced. It has to happen again and again and again. And so when they're both on the same page and they're approaching it with the same consistency, it's going to change. So that's some words I would say to parents struggling with this. And then also to remember, it doesn't happen overnight. There has to be a pattern built up where children say, okay, this is dependable. This is what I see is happening. I know this, my needs are met. I know when I communicate this way, they get it and they respond to me consistently. I can trust the adults in my life. So, if you stick with it and you keep the path, you can support your child's behavior changing over time with that undercurrent always of the simple love that comes with being a parent and feeling that for your child, and not letting that get overshadowed by this sense of, I need my child to be a good child so that they're meeting the needs of this childcare program. Your child gets to be exactly who they are and should always be welcomed for who they are. And it's the adult's job in the child's life to kind of shape an environment where the child can succeed rather than punishing a child for being who they have been. Their brain has been adapted to be up to that point in life.
Kerrie, I love that. And once again, as we're talking about, raising relationships, I love you highlighting that the relationships aren't just about that parent-child relationship, but also the adult caregiver relationships. I love how you bring up that having those secure relationships between a parent and a teacher, a parent and a director, how those are so critical, even in the wellness, the mental wellness of that child, how it really has this parallel process, right, that we talk about so often of those adult caregiver relationships really matter in the wellness of a child. So thank you for highlighting that for us. And again, we can't get off of this theme of relationships. It really is central to all of this work. So thank you for highlighting that. Tiffany, I saw your face as well. Like you maybe wanted to ask a question or you had a thought about that.
I was just thinking about that relationships piece too, and how it really is relational health that we're talking about. We're trying to promote those healthy relationships from the very beginning for that child being the center, and then the relationships spiderwebbing out. So all the caregivers, whether it be teachers or a church leader, and of course their primary caregivers in the home, but also the fact that babies are built to connect. They are supposed to connect. That's a piece of what we do as humans. And so those relationships are kind of natural and innate within us. And sometimes we see really tough behaviors, challenging behaviors. Kerrie, you were mentioning that earlier with these young people, especially through COVID, right? We call them COVID babies or COVID children that were in the home at a very, very young age when COVID was occurring. And sometimes I need to just challenge my perspective a little bit when I hear that challenging behavior, or when I'm experiencing it as a parent, because that child has seen, what, if they're 3 years old, they've seen 3 birthdays, 3 Hanukkahs, right? The sun has gone, we've gone around the sun rather, 3 times. And we expect them to have it nailed by that time. And it really does take time, like you said, Kerrie. So that's what I was thinking.
It takes time. And Kerrie, you brought up a important piece, is that it takes time. And if these little ones have experienced trauma in those early years, right, it just really makes it more complex. They have, the experience that all 3-year-olds have to learn about what's outside, what's around them, what are relationships. But when those relationships have caused harm, or they've experienced harm or trauma, it does make it much more complex. And they're still trying to figure out, is my world a safe place? Are these people around me safe people? And my experiences have taught me otherwise. And so they're having to relearn relationships. And so I think, as you said, Tiffany, they've just been here a short while. I've been here a long while, and I'm still not always certain this is a safe place.
Amen to that. All right, Kerrie, is there any question that we should have asked you, but we didn't? Any takeaways that you would like to share before we end our time?
I guess a relevant issue we didn't get to directly is so much about the well-being of the adults, and we're talking a lot about early care and education, and that early care and education teachers are highly stressed. There's a lot of research out there. The stress levels increased dramatically with 2020 with the pandemic, and the latest research says they're higher now. So Unfortunately, it's not like we hit a plateau with 2020 and then it kind of started to decline. And that's because the effects of the pandemic are still alive and well in early care and education settings. The turnover is rough. The pay is abysmal. It's not a job that's well respected in our society, which hurts me. It hurts me to say, it hurts me to think about. I mean, what could be more important than shaping brains of babies? And so, part of this conversation about infant and early childhood mental health has to be about the well-being of our caregivers. And that can happen in the context of relationships, and it needs to happen with just the adults. That's an adult issue entirely. And you mentioned one of the programs I started in 2017 was Be Well, Care Well, which was really looking at that, at the well-being of childcare providers. It's not a replacement. It's not instead of fair pay. It's not instead of access to benefits, but in addition to. We really have to focus on that. The research shows that teachers that are more depressed, more stressed, they are far more likely to expel children. They are far less prepared to tackle even typical behaviors, much less extra challenging behaviors that might show up with a child who has experienced trauma or hardship. And, we can all relate to this. It's not exactly stress or depression, but if you just think like with your own kids, if you're sick with the flu or with the cold, you're not all there. You're not your best self. You're not giving your child everything they need. And so if there are things hindering you being your best self, the children are going to feel that. And so spending time in the conversation of infant mental health and the care of our children, thinking about the well-being of the family members, of the childcare teachers, that really has to be elevated. And again, I'll say that well-being, part of that is talking about in the context of the relationship with the child. And some of it is just, as an adult, I need to attend to this. I need to focus on my own health and well-being. The old, make sure you put the oxygen mask on yourself before assisting a child. And so that's an important concept here as families are listening, as childcare providers are listening, to remember that self-care. I'm kind of getting away from self-care because it sounds like it's the responsibility solely of the adult. I don't know what the alternative is, but it's caring for yourself and creating environments where we're caring for each other in early care and education settings, that the teachers are there for each other, that the director is setting the tone that promotes and values well-being and, activities and relationships among staff that reduce stress, and, providing resources when caregivers do have more severe like depression and things that could be helped with treatment. So that's a part of the conversation I wanted to bring up and share too.
Thank you for doing that, because it is so important. When we say infant and early childhood mental health, we sometimes forget about the adult caregivers and the life of that child and how their wellness, again, is so important for the wellness of that child. And so thank you for helping us understand, again, that infant and early childhood mental health is so much bigger than babies and toddlers and little ones. It is about all of us, all of the adults who care for them as well. And so such an inclusive field, right? And again, we just can't help but love this focus on relationships at every single level. I love how that's a big piece of this work. Tiffany, any closing thoughts as we wrap up today? Again, my cup is full. Hearing you, Kerrie, not only talk about your 20 years of experience in this field, but just I hear your passion for babies still, that little Kerrie in that kindergarten, classroom, getting your quarter for the work that you've done. I still hear that passion 20 years later. So thank you for what you have brought to South Carolina. Thank you for your continued advocacy, for the big systems level work that you're doing. You continue to be a voice on behalf of those babies. So I want to, my cup is full from being in this space with you and hearing about that. But Tiffany, I want to give you space to share any thoughts you have.
I'm just really marinating on what you said, Kerrie, earlier. I wrote it down that it's important that we care for ourselves so that we can care for others. That's the part that I'm walking away from, is that infant and early childhood mental health is really about compassion and understanding just as human beings and extending that to ourselves and others. And so that's what I walk away with today. Thank you so much for your expertise and everything, all the energy, all the time, all the blood, sweat, and tears you've put into helping South Carolina grow when it comes to infant and early child mental health and wellness.
Well, thank you both. It is, it's an exciting field to be in. I truly feel like this is the work to make sure that our society, that humans are just better to each other in the future. It feels big and important right now and going forward. And I am delighted to be part of the work. I'm delighted to work with both of you and appreciate you both so much.
In the next episode of Raising Relationships,
we shift gears a bit and meet up with two pediatricians, Dr. James Collins and Dr. Karen Ratliff-Shaw.
We're going to talk about infant and child development, how best to guide children through their learning and growth, and the new CDC standards for normative development.
Hey, don't forget to share the show and review it on Apple Podcasts. Raising Relationships is made possible by the South Carolina Infant Mental Health Association.
More information about SCIMHA and other resources can be found in the show notes. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is produced for the South Carolina Infant Mental Health Association by Story Studio Network.